Good evening, and the overnight edition of From Day One is upon us. Tonight, Mark Bell brings in Michael Heiser for UFOs, ufology, and extraterrestrials. So, for extraterrestrial radio, here's Art Bell.
Want to take a ride? From the high desert and the great American Southwest, exclusively on Sirius XM Radio, this is Dark Matter with your host, Art Bell. Now, here's Art.
You know what? Some things may change, but this is my new theme, and I love it. In fact, when I hear this, it raises little hackles on the back of my neck. I don't even know what hackles are, but they're raised. I'll tell you that. Hey, everybody. Guess I've got to tell you about last Thursday, huh? When there was no show. No show. Did I have 103 fever? Was I sweating in bed, coughing up? Well, you don't want to know. Was my liver failing? Was I having a very serious brain operation? No. None of the above. What happened is, I was laying in preparation for my show, laying down on the couch. About 5 o'clock, the phone rang, and there was a big honcho back at Sirius XM, and they said, Art, our lines are down. And so you're getting an extra day off. I said, what do you mean our lines are down? Well, their major programs in D.C. went down. They just went down. So that's what happened. There were no phone lines of any kind. I guess earlier in the day, Dr. Laura went down and on and on and on. So that's what happened last Thursday. No, I was not ill, except at not doing the program. But here I am. All right. I want to note, these are important things. You can email me. I'm artbell@artbell.com. Easy. On the website, artbell@artbell.com. Twitter. Yes, you can follow me, and I do make announcements on there. Not pronouncements, announcements. I'm artbell51 on Twitter. And don't forget about the wormhole. You can wormhole me just like Bill has done here. Bill says, hi, Art. Wanted to voice my opinion on Hoagland and his anomalies on Mars. I bought into, literally, the phase on Mars, but not another one of his finds. Note that his number 9 photo looks like all the rocks around it. Bill, really, that's a wormhole message. You know, you bought into the phase on Mars and some other stuff, I guess, but you can't buy into number 9? Oh, Bill. Since when does the good Lord on Mars or Earth put a pipe in the middle of a rock? Even if you consider that to be a rock, which I don't. Look real hard, Bill. There's a pipe there, sticking out horizontally. It's kind of hard to ignore. By the way, Richard will be here for an hour tomorrow night. He'll be talking about Comet Ison, which has turned green as it nears Mars. For some reason, instead of having a red influence, you would think by Mars, right? It's turned green. We'll find out what that means tomorrow night, along with a lot of other stuff about comets. Now, Sirius XM is looking really hard into the possibility of a 4-hour timeout being worked on. You know, so if you're listening to the stream, it won't, disconnect you after 90 minutes. Roswell's Art, I'm so glad the show is back. This is email. My 11th grade Spanish teacher turned me onto the show back in 2001. Anyway, to address the inactivity timeout that everybody's having problems with, the listeners must click something within the player interface. Aha, good tip. Not just move their mouse around the screen. The easiest way and the least disruptive is just double-click the pause button during a commercial break. Yeah, who cares if you mess up our commercials, right? glad the show is back, and so forth and so on. Remember, if you want to say welcome back, folks, Roswell's are the way to say it instead of saying it. So they're working on this 4-hour timeout thing, and we might get it to 4 hours. It'd be really cool. If you didn't, because I was not here last Thursday, we got this really cool thing up I wanted to tell you about last Thursday regarding Scotty's power. Now, he moved that through a house, you know, and we had the photographs of it up. But what Scotty did was he made a video. It's kind of like a, I don't know, video slideshow, and it's really, really cool. You should go to artbell.com and take a look at it. It's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. artbell.com, Scotty's video. You'll have to dig for it a little bit. Now, I think we're just going to call it, everybody's asking about this, everybody. We're going to call it Dark Matter Halloween. And we are going to do nothing but ghost stories. Now, I have a couple of ideas about this, and we do it every year. We're going to do it this year. What I want you to do, if you can, is, of course, we're going to take open lines, unscreened open lines. I think. Wait a minute. Maybe we will screen a little bit. Be sure you have a ghost story. But if you want to email me, you can do so. And if you're going to email me and you have a really good ghost story, include your phone number, and we may call you. So that's a way to get some of the really, really, really good ones in. So if you've got one, email me, artbell@artbell.com, include your phone number, and on Dark Matter Halloween, your phone may ring, and it may be us. Well, I checked about, 15 minutes ago, turned on CNN briefly. The countdown clock was still going. Are we launching to Mars? No. We're counting down to the close of the government. Again. It's interesting, I've noticed that Congress now has a 10% approval rating. Higher, actually, than Satan himself. Oh, by the way, if they do close the government up, it's so sad, isn't it, that agencies like the IRS will close. Oh, but wait, they won't. IRS, even though our state parks are gone, trying to apply for a passport, forget it. But the IRS will stay open. Mm-hmm. Essential to national security? Oh, boy. It's been said that when you're one step ahead of the crowd, you're a genius. When you're 2 steps ahead, you're a crackpot. All right, looking around the world very briefly, inspectors charged with the enormous task of overseeing the destruction of Syria's deadly chemical weapons stockpiles kicked off their mission Monday, racing to meet tight deadlines against the backdrop of civil war, and probably also racing to catch up with the people who are trying to move the weapons around, I would think. Syria says it is fighting rebels who eat human hearts. Serious about this. Syria's foreign minister claimed Monday that his government is fighting a war against al-Qaeda-linked militants who eat human hearts and dismember people while they're still alive, then send their limbs to family members. I thought that was an old Russian trick. Nearly 3 dozen migrants marched across the U.S.-Mexico border without papers on Monday. The latest group of a younger generation brought to the U.S. illegally as children seeks to confront head-on immigration policies they consider unjust. Well, good luck with the government doing anything about that or anything else, including even continuing past midnight Eastern. Now, listen, I've got, just in case there is a last-moment resurrection, and the government is going to stay open in case they vote the right way, be sure and wormhole me right away, please. That just doesn't come out right. Doesn't matter how you say it. Send me a wormhole message if they suddenly keep the government open, all right? This is a very, very interesting story. Credit to the anomalous. Authentic alien images from Roswell finally found. Does that end in a question mark? Yes. The UFO iconoclast. These images exist as Kodachrome slides, and Anthony Regalia, late of the Roswell Dream Team, hopes to set the record straight on the truth and what's a lie surrounding the leaked stories in the past week. There have been rumors everywhere of new, real Roswell photographs. Thing is, though, Anthony says they're not going to release them to the general public since the owners are put off by some unprofessional ufologists. Is it a shell game to maintain interest in Roswell by teasing all of us? Or are the slides owners genuinely creeped out by the unwanted invasion of their privacy? Well, I'd go for the latter. This is fireball time, folks. I mean serious fireball time. A huge fireball explosion created a power outage and a lot more in Yucatan, Mexico. That was Sunday evening last night. A weird sky phenomena broke up the monotony of a small Maya town as a huge object thought to be a fireball, and you can tell me what it is because you're going to be able to see it. It lit up the skies over the town of Iqmal in the southern Yucatan around 8:30 p.m. local time. The falling object was accompanied by a strong thundering noise, loud blast when it hit the ground. And it did hit the ground. Now, the crash, that's the word used here, was followed by flashing blue hazes. You can imagine that. Flashing blue hazes and a power outage. The flames were observable until about 2 a.m. at the object's landing site. See, they used the word landing there. The sky phenomena was also observed in several other Mexican townships. What was it? We don't know. As you can imagine, people got totally freaked out by all this, and they found stuff. Now, you can see this thing, or these things. I'll leave it up to you. You take a look. Of course, we've got photographs. Something pretty good size crashed in Yucatan. If you go to artbell.com, you can take a look-see at it. Now, the police there were toying with some of the debris of whatever in the hell this was. By the way, maybe one of you can name it for me. I have no idea what this thing is. It looks like number 9. Well, not really. But you get the idea, right? Pretty big. Whatever it was, it came down, was pretty darn big. Space debris, maybe. And the police were playing around with some of the debris, and there is the picture of a human-like figure made of the debris. Now, whether the police did that or it came that way, I don't know. Other fireballs, I'll tell you tomorrow. We're out of time here. Other fireballs in Ohio. So it's like we're in Fireball City here, folks. I mean, lots and lots of fireballs. I'm not sure what's going on, but keep your eye on the sky, huh? All right, well, I'm not going to take any more of Mike Heiser's time. He is our guest tonight, Mike Heiser, and he will be coming up in just a very few moments. The number 1 song, actually, of all time. You know that, right? From the high desert and the great American Southwest, this is Dark Matter, raging in the nighttime. Oh, man, everybody's a critic. Phil sends a message through the wormhole that says, oh, come on, Art. Art Bell, Halloween? That isn't what I said. I said Dark Matter Halloween. Anyway, he goes on, how about something more creative like Phantom Matters? Well, look, if any of you have a brilliant idea of what we can call it, then feel free, by all means, to suggest it to me in email, and if I like it, I'll change it. Nothing's written, in stone here. Some of the things Mike Heiser talks about now, on the other hand, are written in stone. Mike Heiser is a scholar in the fields of biblical studies and the ancient Near East. He is currently the academic editor for Logos Bible Software in Bellingham, Washington, and serves as an adjunct professor at 3 colleges and universities. Mike has a PhD in Hebrew and ancient Semitic languages, along with 2 master's degrees in biblical studies and ancient history. In 2005, he was named one of Fate magazine's 100 most influential people in ufology. Wish I'd seen that list. Mike is a well-known critic of ancient astronaut beliefs and for having the Majestic Documents tested by a computational linguist for authenticity. He is also known for his supernatural thriller, The Facade, which focuses on how an ET disclosure might impact traditional religious beliefs. Oh, we're going to have fun with that tonight. And how the alien question might be related to ancient texts, including, of course, the Bible. Mike, welcome to Dark Matter.
Boy, Art, thanks for having me on. I just have to say, listening to you read the news is like listening to Vin Scully call a baseball game.
Really?
It's just, oh yeah. I mean, I got to take a breath here. I don't want to sound like too much of a fanboy, but I'm just thrilled that you're back on the air. I don't know how you waited this long to come back, because it sounds like you just love it.
Well, it's called a non-compete, Mike.
Oh man, I would have just been pulling my hair out.
What little I have left, yes.
Oh, it's great to hear you.
Well, thank you. I've never received a compliment for just reading the news. I thought that was, I don't know.
I have hackles too, at your introduction, your
What
music.
part really got you? The eating of the hearts, was it?
No.
No?
Oh, it's just rhythmic, just taking simple headlines, and it's Art Bell reading the news. You could just sort of sit there and listen to it for hours.
Okay.
It just brings back great memories, for me. Because I listened to you, for years while I was in grad school, all by myself. I'm holed up as a security guard in my little shack, or the genetics lab that I had to guard, and I'm listening to Art Bell.
I know you mean that like in the very, I know you mean that in like the very best way, but
great.
I know, but it makes me feel old.
Well, I'm as old, the X number of years removed, as you are, but it's just great to hear you again.
All right, well then listen to this, Mike, and then we'll come right back to you. Mr. Bell, this is an email. I'm so glad you're back on Sirius XM. Discovered your show about 15 years ago on a regular radio by accident. Enjoyed it very much. Get this, folks. I had originally heard your show on the island of Okinawa when I was a 9-year-old kid and we lived in Naha. My dad was a pilot in Vietnam. We were stationed on the Rock. And you introduced me to the rock and roll music. Became such a big part of my life. You were the first DJ I remember, and I had my little transistor radio I listened to with a single earpiece. Yeah, they referred to it, something I did when I was there. I was on a teeter-totter in a contest with a couple of Marines. I had a Navy guy as partner, and we were up against 2 Marines. And we went for 57 hours, something like that. Anyway, he ends the email. Remember now, he first heard me when he was 9 years old. I'm 56 now, Art, and will always have a special place for Art Bell, my heart, mine. You're my Wolfman Jack. 56 years old now, and this person first heard me when they were 9. See, it's right. What you said is right down that alley.
That's not quite that far, but that's pretty impressive.
At least you didn't hear me when you were 9. All right, let's get started. I want to talk about ufology. I mean, did you hear the first story that I read about the Roswell? Have you heard these rumors
Oh yeah, I've heard them, and I've read I'll be charitable here, the conflicting accounts of the story of the photos surfacing, and boy, this is gonna be a big fight. I mean, it's already been a big fight, but it's gonna be a big fight.
What would you say, Mike? This is just a sort of a what if, but if they released these Roswell photographs, they were authenticated, and it was proven that we were visited by these creatures that, who knows, probably were at Area 51 for a while or disposed of in some manner or are still alive, whatever. In other words, real creatures. If it's proven, what will you say?
Well, I would say I'm not terribly surprised. Personally, I don't have any.
Really?
Yeah, I don't really have any difficulty, theologically or religiously. But on the heels of that, that's me talking. I mean, I can say, well, I'm not real surprised, that. Given this or that, it's not really too much of a stretch. I mean, I look at it as an academic. I know that this question has been around literally, for 2,000 years. It goes all the way back to Aristotle, before. This is pre-Christian. Are there other worlds? I mean, everybody's been talking about this for millennia. It's only really been recently that it's just become this scary thing, for religious people. So I would try to get people to pay attention to the conversation that's been happening for so long and say, look, it's a big deal because it is, now we have, evidence of this. But as far as the discussion, I mean, this, sort of just falls right into place. Then the questions change. They become different. It's not, are we alone or not? Then it's like, well, what does this mean? Where they come from? Are there others? And all this sort of thing. I'd like to live, in the Star Trek world, where there's life, elsewhere and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm known for just asking what I think are reasonable questions about evidence and things like that. But if we ever had it, I wouldn't be unenthusiastic about it at all. But that's me. Don't you think,
Mike? Don't you think that in this era of discovering suddenly hundreds and hundreds of exoplanets, planets that are like Earth that could conceivably support life, that's a major discovery, you've got to admit, in terms of the probability of life being discovered.
Yeah, I think those kind of finds are better than something like the Drake equation. I tend to be in the crowd that has a fairly low view of the Drake equation because I don't know.
Explain for everybody the Drake equation, please.
Well, this is Frank Drake, the astronomer, came up with a famous equation that tried to articulate the probability of life existing elsewhere. And that's a worthy thing to attempt. The problem with the Drake equation is that every point of the equation was made up. In other words, there wasn't any data for it. Now, that's why I say this kind of thing. When we actually are starting to get data, there's X number of planets now that, to the best of our scientific ability, will support life. That starts to fill in some of those gaps. And so when I think probability, if someone's talking to me about the Drake equation, it's like whatever. But if they're talking about discoveries like this, to me that helps.
Okay, so the last 5 years of the discovery of these exoplanets changes the equation?
Well, if you're making a pun there, yes. I would say, yeah, it changes the conversation in this way. I think the conversation on probability actually becomes more data driven than a sort of a contrived equation. And I don't want to say contrived there in a negative sort of way, but because I think it's worth trying to speculate, but without data, that's what you've got. You've got speculation. And I think it's a reasonable conclusion if it becomes a more reasonable conclusion, let's put it that way, if we have, evidence that there are other places that, again, life as we know it could be sustained. It doesn't prove anything, but it does make the probability reasonable. For me, it gets it on the table. If we didn't have any sort of planet other than Earth that we could talk about in these terms, and then we're going to have this probability discussion. Without that, to me, it doesn't even really deserve to get on the table.
Well,
now that
we're just looking at little dots of light and saying, man, it would be a great waste of space if there weren't.
That's an emotional argument, but I'd rather have data than, I don't want to sound cold here, but I'd rather have data than the emotional argument.
Right. Well, we're beginning to get that data, and with those planets, for example, I had somebody from SETI on, Seth Shostak from SETI, and, they haven't heard anything yet, Mike, but it occurs to me that if there's all these exoplanets that are like Earth, capable of sustaining life, why do we suppose that life would evolve, I don't know, the way we have technologically, and even have radio or TV or even imagine it?
I think that's a reasonable question to ask, and I've wondered that myself. And you and I aren't alone there. I mean, there are criticisms of SETI in that regard, that why aren't you using a different strategy, to look for this or that. So, the truth is, the blunt truth is we don't really have any reason to make that assumption that they would be communicating the same way. But the reality is that's what's within our reach. And, it's a funding issue. It's a technology issue. It's a garnering enough interest, to get people to care issue. All those things are part of the discussion.
You would describe yourself how? As a skeptic?
I would describe myself as someone who, again, would like these things to be true, but I want there to be real evidence for it. I'm not impressed with anecdotes. I'm not impressed with emotional arguments. I just like to know, and when I say I believe or think X, I'd like to have something concrete to sort of base that on, to fall back on. So with some people, that makes me a skeptic. With other people, especially, in the more fundamentalistic wing of Christianity, what I've already said tonight is just awful, because there's this tendency to equate the whole question of extraterrestrial life with one of two things, and probably both, and that is the demonic realm, and then, you must, buy into Darwinian evolution. And I'll confess, I'm not really disturbed by evolution. I don't really like materialistic Darwinism, but that's not the same as the idea of evolution.
Are you convinced of evolution, Mike?
Yeah, I think evolution is a reality. The question in my mind, there are questions in my mind like, to what extent, what mechanisms did it need? I'm sort of at an advantage here, because when I was in graduate school, the place where I went to church was heavily populated by professors from the hard sciences at the university there, the University of Wisconsin.
Right.
We had the head of environmental studies, we had the head of botany, we had 2 research physicists, we had a geologist, we had a professor of electrical engineering, we had another one in chemistry. I mean, the people like me in the humanities were like completely outnumbered. And all of them were very serious, about their faith, their theological commitments. And every one of them accepted the idea that, evolution, that's how God did it. No kidding. It's a no-brainer. They just didn't flinch about it. It was not trying to start a conversation with them. Well, what do you think about people who, might be here, even in our church, or some colleague you have somewhere, or some acquaintance that don't agree? And to them, it wasn't even a sensible question to ask, but yet they were very serious. Well, I spent 9 years in that environment. And so I just have to chuckle, when I read things or hear things about how this is sort of an all or nothing proposition, or we either have to accept this or that, the Bible or evolution. There's no in between it. It's like, I just know better. I know intellectually better because I read lots of stuff, but I know by experience as well, that these are not mutually exclusive things. And so I'm not a scientist. I have to depend on scientists to sift arguments for me. I read things that I appreciate, on evolution. I read, there's a lot of debate within the hard sciences about evolution. Evolutionists don't all agree.
Right. Isn't it easily said, Mike, that, God may have started the process of evolution, and that sort of cleans it all up right there?
Yeah, and that's where most of these guys were. I mean, I think there may have been one or two that would be willing to say it was sort of random. In other words, when you take that position that you just articulated, that God started the process, that involves a deliberate decision. You're speaking of God as a person, with making intelligent decisions and whatnot, and that's the common view for people who are in the sciences who happen to be Christians who accept evolution. There might have been one or two of these people that I knew that would have taken a step back even from that and made it a little more random, closer to what you would think of as a secular Darwin position. They were somewhere in between there. But I agree with you. I think that idea, and then the sub question is, tell me why God couldn't make that decision. Tell me, right? Exactly. How, on what basis would you say that God is limited and kept from making that decision? And to me, that just kills the conversation. But, again, that's me. So I'm not troubled by the idea that if there is this thing, this force of nature, and in God's hand, some providential thing that we call evolution, maybe life evolved somewhere else. And then the discussion changes to, well, would God have a purpose in that? What would the point be? What's the relationship between that and us? And, you get into a number of layers of other questions, but I don't think the discussion needs to stop with the first question, about probability and evolution.
Simply could have evolved from stardust. I mean, basically, stardust, mud puddles, lightning strikes, you name it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is an issue, because if I were to say that to one of my friends, Professor so and so, he would say, oh, whatever. But someone who's sort of been trained to think that, well, the reason, Art Bell is suggesting that, or the reason someone is saying that, is because they want me to accept the idea that, I'm an extraterrestrial, or extraterrestrials are our space brothers. And in other words, because they've sort of been conditioned to respond a certain way, they, unfortunately will. They won't really stop to think, well, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 different ways to sort of look at this, and they'll kind of gravitate to the one they really dislike, and then it becomes a real thing to fight over.
All right. So with regard to extraterrestrials, you're not married to the idea.
No,
nor are you that distant from it that you can't embrace the possibility.
No, I like I said, I have this romantic spasm in me that, boy, wouldn't it be nice if Star Trek were real, minus the Klingons and the Romulans, I guess. But, that would be really interesting. It'd be fascinating. It's sort of on my short list of, boy, wouldn't I like to see this before I die, that kind of thing.
Oh,
but on the other side, well, I have things like let's clone a mammoth and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there are just some things I'd love to see them do. And again, this is on the list, so I'd like to know. But on the other side, I don't think we really have evidence yet. A lot of what people accept as evidence, I just don't think is really good evidence. And so I sort of suspend it and hope, but because I hope one direction doesn't mean I'm going to embrace what I think is a really bad argument.
So the people who would ask you to accept the evidence, Mike, I should say, preponderance of the evidence, when you look back at all the UFO sightings, when you look, all the stories, they claim it all adds up to, it's got to be true.
Yeah, they do claim that, and that's the part I have difficulty with. I don't think it adds up to that at all.
Okay.
Ask yourself this question: why do we, with the whole UFO thing, why do we think about UFOs and think extraterrestrial? What do you think most people would say?
In my case, Mike, I had a sighting, right? A very close sighting, a very convincing sighting. I could have thrown a rock at the damn thing. It floated over my head, or more likely defied gravity, and then I watched it float out across the valley with my wife at that time. And once you've seen something like that, then yes, you begin to ask questions like the ones you were just talking about.
Right. Now, if I saw, and you're referring to the triangle, I remember you talking about that on the air at length. If I saw one of those, my first thought would be, either let's get in the house or boy, that's really cool. But I've read this sort of technology, especially the slow-moving ones, is really on the board in patents. I mean, I actually blog about this stuff, with some frequency. Back into the 20s and 30s. In other words, you could have seen a dirigible or a dirigible married to nuclear power. It's harder to talk dirigible when they make, when they go real fast and make turns and all this sort of thing. But what I'm getting to is you think extraterrestrial because it's an unfamiliar technology. Right. And it seems like the technology is something that, because we haven't experienced, the assumption is that it's not ours or that we couldn't do it. I've actually become more convinced that the technology is a dead end. Again, the Germans were making, triangular craft in the 40s. They had passed, all the tests.
What do you mean?
They had nuclear power,
yes.
The whole bit.
Mike, what do you mean it's a dead end? Explain that, please.
I don't think it's the question to ask. In other words, I don't think it's the thing that will tilt the question one way or the other. To me, the tougher issue is biologicals. Okay, the claims of bodies and whatnot. So for me, that's what I would have to have. I would have to have. Let's say that we have these pictures, or there's some other real clear biological evidence. Okay, well that answers question one. Question two is actually a little different, and that involves visitations and then individual sightings, and then you sort of have to go from point one to these other points. But for me, the fundamental question of are there intelligent extraterrestrials out there? I would need a biological entity, because there's so much that you can look at and dig out, and people have just devoted their life to tracing these exotic technologies. Like even in the Majestic Documents, there are Majestic Documents that actually have the elements in the quote-unquote power plant of the craft that you can find were used in technology during World War II to produce
I'm going to have to interrupt you there.
Without a reactor. I mean, they're all the same elements.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there, Mike. Hold tight, please. We're going to do a break. Yeah. Mike Heiser is my guest. So stay right where you are, because it will be quite a night, ladies and gentlemen. That was really strange. Now, I'm used to unusual occurrences on this program, but that was bizarre. It's just like everything was suddenly gone. No audio, nothing. Really, really weird. Well, I've had everything from satellites spinning out of control to magnetic blankets across my valley. It's just really, really strange. Anyway, back with Mike Heiser. Mike, the Majestic Documents, these were quoted almost biblically for years and years and years and years by so many people. And I guess you finally had a good, hard look and went out and got them tested. Can you describe how you did that and the results?
Sure. And for listeners, if they go to my website, which is just drmsh.com, at the top there's a link that says Quick Links, and if they go to that page, they'll be able to download the study we did for free. One of the links there, I'll just sort of overview it. What we did, and I say we because I had known of someone named Dr. Carol Chasky who did this for a living. She is a computational linguist, and she did her doctoral work at Brown University and actually came up with her own program as part of her dissertation to test something called authorship attribution. And she has made a career, like in court cases, when someone needs to either verify or rule out that a document was written by the person that, say, signed that letter or claimed authorship, to be able to test that. And so she has had a long career, and her work has been featured in numerous court cases. If you look her up on the web, she has a whole list of that. So when I found out about her, I thought, well, this is the ideal person to test some of these documents if she was interested.
May I ask a quick question, sure, Mike? And it is this. Can you rattle off briefly the criterion she used? In other words, how does she authenticate? What methods?
What she focuses on would not be common vocabulary, but would be what we call in grammar function words, little words like conjunctions, prepositions, interjections. In other words, the words that you don't really think about, but you just sort of habitually use in certain ways.
Okay.
That everybody sort of develops these unconscious patterns. And so she actually focuses on the uncommon in terms of, non-specialized vocabulary. But another way to look at it is they're the most common words that everybody uses. So when you go through a document, again, in her procedure, this is what you're looking for. And the whole idea is to establish patterns. Now, it's only the methods we used only apply to documents in the Majestic group that had authorship attribution. In other words, a particular document that supposedly was sent by, Roosevelt or, Hillenkotter or somebody like that, General Twining.
Right.
So we had to pull those out. And then we needed documents that were more than one or two sentences, because some of these are just memos that, just one sentence. And so we had to have at least a paragraph. So we winnowed that. And then we wanted to zero in on the documents. And this was really a funding issue because I was paying for this. Which are the ones that have the most content that is the most explosive? Which are the ones that talk about extraterrestrial, bodies or, something that really, has an important role to play potentially in the whole narrative. And so we got a hold of those. And so what you do then is you have your documents that you want to test the attribution. So what I had to do, and I enlisted the help of a couple people to find, okay, we're going to test two documents here that were written by, General Twining. Well, let's go to archive websites and we would, try to find documents that nobody is going to dispute by this particular person. So we'd pull half a dozen of those, and we had to get them all typed out. We typed them as they were. We didn't correct anything if there were typos in there. And she basically takes all of that, and she's trying to establish, again, using the computer, patterns, again, isolating on the function words, within that person's consciousness. So even if they were dictated, as opposed to handwritten letters that were later transcribed, it's still reflecting the thought pattern of the person that produced the particular document. And so all of the knowns get fed in, and then patterns are established, and then the unknowns. And what she did was kind of interesting. She took all of them, regardless of author attribution, in one round of tests, and sort of put those against all of the knowns by all the different people. There were 17 total documents, 8 or 9 different authors. And I asked her, well, why would you do that round of testing? And she said, if some of these documents, regardless of who the authorship is attributed to, if they start matching each other, regardless of the name, that's going to tell us that there may have been a common hand in producing them.
I've got it right. Let me just pause for one second, and that's fascinating. What is her record? In other words, this sort of a test must have some sort of percentage of success associated with it historically, right?
Well, there's going to be, in the results that are produced, you're going to have this. If you look at the actual document, the actual article on the website, I have the Excel tables reproduced in that document. It's a PDF. And there's going to be a number, I hate to use the word percentage, but I'm not a math person, so I'll use it. There's a percentile number that is produced by the databases and the procedures that she uses. And she will then, she actually would tell me, because I can't decipher this, she told me what the numbers meant as far as, okay, this one fits in with the patterning of the knowns, and so I would colorize them in the document for the reader. This one doesn't, this one does, and then she actually we went through every line of the spreadsheet, and she said she would highlight which ones that appeared to her eye mathematically, again, according
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you're having a hard time hearing me when I start to talk, but this is really important to me to understand what her record is. In other words, what her in past documents of the same sort. Is she right 80% of the time, 70% of the time, 50% of the time, 99.9? What kind of hit record does she have? I'm trying to learn, what kind of science we've got here.
Yeah, she's going to be well into the 90s because her work is regularly tested in court, like under oath and things like that. So anyone who's interested in her, again, could go to her website. She describes different court cases that she's been part of, and what she did, what she was asked.
No, it's just fine. If it's in the 90s, that's fine. I just wanted to understand the science that we were hearing about. So, I think genetics is like in the billions, right? Only one chance in 5 billion. That's not your child. So,
right,
okay,
right.
90% or better.
Right. So what the end result was of the 17 documents that were tested, again, it's a limited pool and only the ones that have an authorship attribution.
Right.
Only one of them she was able to look at and say, this one is legit. And that was the General Twining memo to General George Shulgin. It's a 1947 document. The other ones did not align with the knowns by the same author. And so she said, in a court case, this would just get thrown out. We could not draw any conclusions. We could not say anything factual about this document. We couldn't base anything factual on this particular document. So one passed the test. The most interesting thing to me was that 8 of them had authorial affinities with documents in the pool that were supposedly authored by somebody else. And she said, look, it doesn't prove that the documents were produced by a common hand, but it does suggest it. She was real picky about her terminology there. And I reproduced her terminology in the document. She would say it doesn't prove that they were all, manufactured by the same hand, but it's sort of...
Quick question, Mike. The Twining document, the one that she authenticated, what could you give all of us an idea of what was the essence of the Twining?
It would probably be looked at as neutral by you and UFO enthusiasts. There's no extraterrestrial speculation in that one. It's the one where Twining says that, within his phrases, within present U.S. knowledge, we could reproduce these kind of craft that he was talking about. If any of your listeners are going to look at the document, it's point F in the document where that language comes from. He talks about, speeds at 7,000 miles an hour that are subsonic. And, Twining's assessment in that particular document is that we're not thinking extraterrestrial here. Now, obviously, there are other documents within the Majestic, cache that we couldn't test because they have no authorship attribution. So the study itself is limited, but I should mention this one other thing to give Stan Friedman some kudos here. I deliberately also chose, again, when there was an author, documents that Friedman and others had, by other means, forensically shown that were fakes. And her study flagged those same documents. They did not pass the test. Only one did. So I didn't tell her about that either. I sort of used that for my own sake, that because I don't understand the science, I'm depending on her. To me, there would have been something wrong if one of those came up good when I knew they weren't. And so it actually validated some of what the work that Stan had done on some of these other documents. Now I know he's very committed to the extraterrestrial, view of the documents. So it doesn't prove or disprove that. It does show, though, that there's a lot in this that really looked suspicious. And that shouldn't be earth-shattering either, because anybody who knows about the history of how we got the Majestic Documents, it's a very shady history. For your listeners, again, I think one of the best things they can read on this is the 2007 MUFON Symposium document. That was an update on Majestic research. I have a link to that on my quick link site. But I'm kind of sour on the Majestic Documents. I know that there's a lot that's post 1989, which is a year that matters for this, this discussion, that could very well be genuine, and some of the older ones might be, but it's got such a checkered history that I don't feel like I can trust them for a whole lot.
Okay, so other than the Twining document, the others showed basically attributes that would say, look here, the same person wrote all of these, except this one.
Yeah, for instance, you'd be looking at a Hillenkotter document that matched the profile of a JFK document. Now, that just shouldn't happen.
No.
Because they're different people. And she just flagged, 8 of the 17 just sort of, stuck out like sore thumbs, to her, that she just thought there's just something not right here. And she flagged those right off the bat. The other ones didn't pass the test for, other reasons. But those 8, she said, there's 8 in here that they just look suspicious.
Okay. My next question for you, Mike, would be the UFO community. In other words, when you came out with these findings, how did the UFO community react to it? Was there a lot of anger? Were people lashing out at you, or what happened?
Well, it was mixed, as you might expect. I unveiled this at a conference in Roswell, and Rich Dolan and I talked afterwards. And Rich was really enthusiastic about it. I mean, he more or less said, this is the kind of thing that we need to be doing. And I expect that from Rich. I think Rich is a serious researcher and have a high regard for his commitment to doing real research. My biggest disappointment was actually Stan Friedman, because he didn't want to really hear anything about it. I think he somehow got my novel, which has a lot of, there's a lot of religious angle to it, and the whole UFO question, confused with this report, because he just sort of went off on it, and I was a religious fundamentalist or something like that. It's like, Stan, it validates this other work you did. I think you might want to actually read the document, and not get it confused with the novel. So it was mixed, but that wasn't a surprise, and that's okay. I just wanted to.
Is it unfair, Mike, to suggest, as Stanton seemed to, that your religious background influenced you in some way? I mean, I think it's a fair question.
Well, it would be if I had written any of the documents, and if I was the computational linguist that had it tested, and I was the computational linguist that produced the program that had it tested. I'm none of those things. I was just the guy that said, hey, here's somebody who does this for a living. Would she be interested in, testing these documents? And she was. So, it didn't really go anywhere as far as a huge, impact, because, to be honest with you, people are sort of committed, to what side of this question they're on. Most people, are more interested in looking at evidence that kind of, leans the way they hope it leans. I wanted to know, because I'm a language guy, and we do this kind of work, in the office with not forensic, authorship attribution, but we do lots of stuff with software that applies to languages. And so this just seemed an area that I could actually contribute something, into ufology. So we did it.
Okay. Well, it certainly wouldn't surprise you, Mike, would it, that a lot of people would perhaps accept Stanton's notion that you are committed to a particular point of view, and this fits that point of view. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with the findings or the testing or anything else, but I can see why people, might say you're married to a certain point of view as well.
Well, I don't really care one way or the other. I mean, if there are aliens out there, then great. I just like to know, and I'd like there to be real evidence. I don't want cloak and dagger, anecdotes. I don't want, accusations going from this ufologist back to that ufologist where I have to pick which one I like.
And
that is not data. And if that irritates people, well,
so be it.
I'm not responsible for that.
Okay. All right. No, that's entirely fair. You've also debunked the ancient astronaut idea, right? I mean, what about the long runways down south and all of that? All the rocks that have been decorated, seeming to show aliens with space helmets and all of it, Mike. Why? In what way do you feel? In other words, do you have something, I don't know, equivalent to what you did with the Majestic Documents when it comes to ancient alien theory?
Well, I don't. In my mind, I distinguish everything we've talked about up to this point. The question of, are there extraterrestrials? Are these documents real or not? So on and so forth. I distinguish all of that. To me, that's serious ufology. The ancient alien stuff, I don't take seriously at all, because I do know ancient texts and I do know ancient history. I know where to get the information in archaeology and anthropology and all this stuff. And that part, and I know they get lumped together, and I understand why they get lumped together. But I treat one seriously and I treat the other not seriously, because frankly the work is extraordinarily poor and in many cases just literally made up. And I don't think it really deserves the amount of attention that the other part of ufology gets.
Well, there is some hard evidence in forms of pictograms and in the form of what appear to be runways, that kind of thing. How do you handle that?
So we have a pictogram from a foreign culture. We have no text that tells us what it is.
Very true.
So what we have, and this is just a blunt reality, okay? This is Realville here. We have a picture that I'm going to use my 21st century mind, part of which is influenced by this narrative, and now I'm going to interpret that picture. I could be miles and miles and miles and miles and miles away from anything accurate. And in most cases, people have been able to produce the same picture in other provenanced objects where it's clear as to what the purpose of this thing was.
And with that, we are going to leave Michael Heiser and Art Bell for tonight. Come on back for part 2 tomorrow night. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Get us to the goal of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. And release the Krakens as we march along here from day one. Have a great night. Enjoy your night's sleep. We'll see you tomorrow here on From Day One.